Hey, welcome to Mad Dodge Productions. Today's another episode of MC and Mad Talk, the War of Northern Aggression. This is episode 5. We're going to be digging into the 1860 election of Lincoln and perhaps secession, which will be the point where you might need to turn down your volume a little bit. I'm pretty sure MC and I might butt heads on that issue. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm in pain.
Yeah, so yelling at me about the Civil War should help that.
Probably not, but it'll make me feel better.
But let's dig right in.
Just let everybody know. It's just I kind of wrenched my shoulder when I was working in the yard yesterday. That's why I'm in pain. But
I'm going to present you to everybody since you have the timeline up. Okay, all right. But yeah, let's dig right in. So 1860. This is a quote here. Let's start with this. Perhaps even now, the pen of the historian is nibbed to write the story of a new revolution. William Yancey in Charleston. They really did think this was a second American Revolution. And do you disagree with them? Do you?
I totally disagree with them.
Really? Because the King of England would have called the first revolution treason. Matter of fact, he did.
Okay,
that didn't make it wrong for us to leave England. What makes it wrong for the South to leave the United States? But maybe we're jumping ahead here.
You're jumping way ahead into what's going on and why. And here becomes the nub of the issue. All right, what you're seeing now is you see in the South and you see in the North. All right. From a cultural perspective, they're starting to separate, but they're starting to separate on a very specific issues. Now, I think one thing that is quite illustrative here is, all right, think about the 1830s. Okay, in the 1830s, you have slavery in America, you have free states, and you have slave states. Right? These are contentious issues. Okay, but you're not seeing border raids between the states. You're not seeing towns being burned because one's free, one's slave. Okay, you're having local disagreements sometimes where you're getting certain fisticuffs here and there. All right, but overall, you're not seeing what has been taking place now in the 1850s and the 1860s. And so the question comes about, okay, why? Why is this now an issue? Why is the issue of slavery? All right. Why is it coming to fisticuffs now? What has changed? What are the dynamics around which that it's getting to the point where people are increasingly engaging in violence over something that's been around since the founding of the nation and even prior to the founding of the nation?
Well, I think the problem lies where we talked about before, the Dred Scott decision and the fact that the balance was thrown off. There is no more balance between free state and slave state.
Okay,
the political fallout from that was secession, in my opinion.
Right, but there's nothing that's preventing a continuation of things as they were. But that's now becoming an untenable position. Why? What is making the decision in people's minds come to the point and coming to the focus? Whereas before, these same issues still remained, all right. But you weren't coming to a head from a physical standpoint into physical violence. It was tolerated by the people who didn't agree with it, right? It was promoted by the people who did, but not to the point of fisticuffs. Not to the point where the person on the other side, all right, is being beaten by a cane until later on.
Yeah, well, you're right, but I mean, both sides were creating the violence that you're talking about.
I'm not arguing that point. What I'm trying to point out is this is becoming an area of violence, and the question I have is why? Why is this now becoming a question that you're seeing violence take place where that same question still existed before, but there wasn't violence before? Why are things becoming more violent now? And the reason it has to be explained, the reason is you can't get away from the fact that the reason it's happening is you're seeing cultural shifts, not just in the North, but also in the South. All right. And these shifts are what's leading to this from a cultural standpoint.
No, I see your point there. But what kind of shift do you think was really happening, and what was the root cause of it? Because I see politically the bloodshed started, you know, from John Brown, from Bleeding Kansas, and it continued on to Harper's Ferry, Virginia. I mean,
it did not start with John Brown, considering that John Brown didn't precede Lawrence, Kansas.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay, but what I think is causing this more than anything else, all right, is technology, all right, and how technology is changing people's views of the world, all right. And one of the things that technology does, whether people realize this or not, is technology always increases free time. Okay, it increases people's ability to make food with less, so therefore they can engage in other activities, all right, as they come about, right? It frees them up from the concerns of the age, meaning there are primary concerns: food, right, water, oxygen. Okay, it back prior to technology starting to come to the fore, getting enough food and getting enough water, all right, because oxygen wasn't a problem, but getting enough food and getting enough water took up most people's time. And then it comes into, okay, now we can, once we get those established, building a house, all right, or shelter, all right, taking care of shelter, food, and water. As that becomes easier to obtain due to technology, and technology makes changes across the board. People think of technology and they see it as, okay, well, you're able to grow more cotton. Yes. Well, what does more cotton allow you to do? Well, more cotton allows you to sit up there and put more clothing on, right, which helps with the shelter. All right, the fact that you're creating steam power allows you to harvest and create more harvesting. And then what's more is you're able to move that harvest from point A to point B, which allows you to distribute areas of relative, abundance to areas of relative dearth, right? Where now, where you had to worry more about getting enough food, well, now it's a lot easier to get that food from areas that have an overabundance of food. All right. So what you're seeing now is you're seeing technology have an effect in these areas across the board. All right. However, all right, there's certain areas that are starting to lag. And so you see a bifurcation starting to take place between the North and the South, where the North becomes far more heavily industrialized. And because the South is what it is, not the least of which is, I'm going to be real frank here, the South, in a lot of ways, from a food perspective, has always had a high abundance. All right. So their need to change how they were doing things isn't as great, because it's the technology revolution to allow food to grow, all right, isn't as impactful as it is on the North.
Well, I think it goes worse than that. If you look at the cotton gin itself, which was a piece of technology, that extended the shelf life of slavery. It did.
Well, it made plantations. It made plantations a viable options, whereas prior to that, and in that regard, you're exactly correct. Prior to that, the only plantations really where slavery was kind of in the fore, all right, was tobacco. And the cotton gin wasn't going to fix that. And tobacco, to be honest, is not something that's easily transferable across larger swaths of land. It wants to be grown in certain areas is where it's best to be grown in. This is why South Carolina, North Carolina, swampy kind of areas is where it does best in. And it's also similar to cotton in that it's very hard on the soil. All right. But because it needs the moist, humid conditions, you can't grow tobacco in Illinois. You can still grow cotton in Illinois. You just can't grow as much of it. All right. You could still grow cotton in a lot of these other areas. All right. But just not as much of it. However, from a plantation perspective, all right, the ability to create large plantation cottons now becomes possible. And this is why you're having this big movement of into slaves into Kansas, because Kansas, believe it or not, has a lot of rich soil, and they could grow a hell of a lot of cotton if you sit up there and put it in a plantation type of environment. Now, further north, just a little bit further north, it's not quite so hospitable. All right. So, and this is another reason why you end up with, kind of like the Mason-Dixon line, right? Is cotton still does prefer heat, all right? It is a hot, warm weather crop, all right? But at the same time, it's not as you don't need the moistness that tobacco, for example, needs.
Yeah, absolutely. But with the revolution in technology, do you also think culturally you had a kind of staring down the nose at one section of the country from the other, and it goes both ways, right?
Well, I think that the one thing that happened now because of that is, remember, the North is needing food. Transportation of food is now much easier. Therefore, they're not as worried about starving anymore, right? And they become even more reliant and more used to having technology in their areas in the North. Now, what does this mean? In a certain sense, it also goes back to what were plantations? Okay, how were plantations established? The plantations, for the most part, were the last remnants of aristocracy left in the country. Many of the people initially, like especially in South Carolina, traced their lineage back to when they came over with the charters, all right, of some lord back in England. And they still looked upon it along those mindsets. That mindset hadn't changed. Whereas in the North, yeah, you had some people that came over initially like that, but it was quickly done away with because the people who became prosperous were usually the common man. They weren't the nobles, and they weren't the lords. They're the guys that were able to work the land, get enough food for the land, and then expand from there. Right? So there's that aspect from looking down your nose at it from the people who say, I work the land, I'm better than you, versus the people who sit up and said, those people are just a bunch of grubby, know-nothings who are dirt beneath my feet. You do have that bifurcation taking place. And this was always a factor, to be honest, in American society up to this point. However, the South's moving away from that mindset isn't taking place as quickly as it was in the North.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, let's talk a little bit about the election itself, okay?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet. I think we need to talk more about the build-up here and what was happening in the country. Okay, you now have the established third party, right, which is the Republican Party. All right, you have the Whigs have now fractured. What's left over of the Whigs is the quote-unquote know-nothing party, right? And then you end up with the Democrats. Okay, so these are basically the big three parties that are now starting to vie for the election.
Yeah, no, and the Democrats, they really made a very big mistake by splitting between Southern and Northern lines. If they wouldn't have done that, the Republicans would not have won the election.
Well, the Democrats, all right, as the question of slavery becomes paramount in the country, all right, the Democrats chose to not pick a side. Let's be perfectly frank. The Democrats were like, okay, we have people that are abolitionists in the Democrat Party. We have people that are anti-abolition, right? That are pro-slavery in the party, right? We're just going to ignore it and say, well, we have other concerns and we need to focus on those other concerns. And therefore, the specific question that's dividing the country right now along slavery, we're going to ignore it. Okay. Now, this sounds like an interesting way of compromising and creating the coalition. The problem, however, all right, is through vast sections of the country in the North, the Democrats are falling out of favor because they're being looked upon as not taking a stand. They're being looked upon as being weak, all right, and not being principled.
Would you say that they were trying to be centrist?
You can look at it that way, but really what they're trying to do is they're trying to maintain their own ideals of power, all right, through a broad consensus. All right. And they're ignoring, but the problem is, of course, is that they're ignoring the one main focus that has now become the question throughout the country. All right. The South and the North are now questioning the need for slavery. All right. And it's a question you can't get away from. Okay. You're going to have to make it. People are being pushed to the point of saying, you're going to have to take a position. You got to sit up there and have principles. All right. What principle are you coming down on? So how can you coalesce a principle? In the North now, what you have with the Democrats is like, okay, we're going to ignore the issue of slavery. We're going to focus on, okay, the Union. Okay, this is what's going on. They're talking about the Union. They're talking about the Union. The South, of course, is going the opposite way. The Democrats in the South aren't talking Union. They're talking secession.
Yeah, they're talking disunion, and they're talking about it everywhere. You could find newspaper articles leading up, even while the election is going on. They're saying if a Republican gets in office, we should leave. I mean, that is the public sentiment, at least that's being pumped out, via the press.
Well, it's being built up by the press. It's being built up by newspapers, okay. It's hard to really know, with the exception of hindsight, right, just how broad-based this really is. And the reason is because there were a lot of papers. Every small town, village, or hamlet had a paper. Not all the papers in the South were pro-slavery. Not all the papers in the North were anti-slavery. Okay. But things were becoming rougher and rougher to support a position that the people in the area around them didn't want supported. Now, there's obvious exceptions to this, not the least of which is South Carolina. Okay, now you got to remember, going back to the ideals of South Carolina, one of the problems with an aristocracy, right, is it's a tiered system. Okay. People that can trail their blood to be bluer than the person below them, all right, has more quote unquote social status. Okay. As a result, that mentality goes all the way into South Carolina, and it can't be ignored of why South Carolina has so much sway within the country. And this was one of the reasons.
Well, that's a very good point, but I would also like to bring up that the majority of Southerners did not own slaves. They didn't.
No,
but the thing is though, out of the ones that didn't own them, a large proportion of them wanted to. They had a dream in their head that was to own my own property and then maybe get a couple, slaves to work the land, and that's just the mindset back then. It wasn't right, but it was their mindset back then. It's kind of like now, if you're homeless and you're in freaking,
they were looking at it from the perspective of joining the landed aristocracy. Okay, this is what they see around them. One of the reasons they're feeling this way has a lot to do with the fact that who are the people who have money around them, and who are the people that society is all enamored with. Well, it is the large slave owners. Why? Because they own all the land, they have all the riches, and like everything else, unfortunately, in our country, all right, there's too many people who are, I want what that guy has. I want what that person has, and
exactly.
and that to them is the American dream.
Yeah, no, and that's what I was doing a horrible job of trying to articulate. Was it's like, you're driving a piece of shit car and a guy in a brand new Ferrari pulls up. You're a little envious. You would like to have that guy's job so you could afford that car. That's the same kind of mindset here from the poor Southern whites.
Sure. And if that guy's a drug dealer and that's the guy who you see every day, well, then I'll be a drug dealer, if that's what it takes.
Yeah, and absolutely.
I'm not trying to.
I brought it up before. If you look at Louisiana, some of the largest slaveholders in the whole state were freed black men. They too had this will to be the aristocracy in the South. They too fed into the sins of slavery. I mean, it's just a horrible situation all the way around. So, I mean, I just wanted to point that out. Go ahead.
No, and you're right about it. I mean, this has so far been more congenial than I was expecting this conversation to be. But you are right about this. All right. Now, as the election goes back and forth, and the debates are happening, and people are putting up the candidates, what starts to become clear is that the Democrats in the North are hemorrhaging voters.
Yes, I know.
Okay. It looks really bad for them, and the reason for it is they're being peppered by the populace that that are representative around them, saying, "Okay, what's your stance on this? Are you pro-slavery or pro abolition?" And they're not able to answer the question because they come back with, "Well, we're pro-union. We're pro-union." Okay. Well, what does pro-union mean? That means that you're trying to be a washy, squishy moderate. You're trying to be all things to both sides. And in the North, they're losing regional power. Now, it's not like today. You don't have, and it's hard for people to understand this. Back in those days, elections were far more local. And what politicians did on the national scale, okay, is that what they would do is they would go inside of a state that they were going to give a speech to. They would talk to the local representatives that were going to, of their own group, meaning, the Republicans would talk to the representatives in that city of other Republicans, and the Democrats would do the same. And they would say, okay, what's important to your people? What should we do? And how are your people looking at it? And they would try to, talk about the problems of that small little region. All right. And when they went to the next whistle stop, all right, or train stop, they would do the same thing. And then they would do the same thing, trying to be one with the people, but there was no large overarching question from a national perspective saying, okay, nationally, what are you looking at? Nationally, how are you making these decisions? There was no large scale like that. Okay. So the Democrats are hemorrhaging. Oh, good grief. Why can't I say hemorrhaging today?
Yeah, they're shedding their voters.
Right.
Their
voter base is leaving them in droves because they're talking about union, and people are like, we don't care about the union. They're looking at it from the perspective of strictly that's an unimportant question in regards to slave or free. And this goes to another mindset that people don't understand. In the North, okay, they are looking at the talk of secession, and they're saying, well, those are just a bunch of blowhard hotheads who don't amount to much. All right, that's just people blowing. No, seriously, they're not truly committed to doing any of that. And why do they have that mindset? Well, a good reason why they have that mindset is they've watched what Delaware has done, they've watched what Rhode Island has done, and they've watched what Massachusetts have done in the past, and nothing ever comes of it. So why would they, from their perspective, why would these guys who they don't travel? All right. It's not like you travel. It's starting to take place. Yes. In regards to moving west, but they're not you don't have people from the North coming to the South and the people from the South traveling to the North. Right. You don't
absolutely.
You're mixing a group. They're meeting in the West, and where you're seeing it in Kansas, you're seeing fighting taking place. But for the most part, the people in the North and the people in the South don't travel amongst themselves back and forth across the border all that much. There are mercantile exchanges. Railroads are making this more common. All right. But it's still not common in and of itself. It's still a very uncommon type of thing that's happening.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But for them to literally think, the South is just blowing hot air, they're going to do what Massachusetts did and just back down. Well, just because Massachusetts lacked the courage of their convictions doesn't mean South Carolina did, and they didn't. But we're talking about the Union here, okay? This is a good quote on the timeline. Kentucky Senator John C. Crittendale maintains, "The Union was established by great sacrifices. The Union is worthy of great sacrifices and great concessions for its maintenance. I trust there is no senator here who is not willing to yield and to compromise much in order to preserve the government and the Union." Man, was he wrong.
Well, okay, yeah. He is wrong. All right. I mean, he does turn out to be wrong. All right. But once again, hindsight's 2020. But it does bolster what I was trying to say. People weren't listening to the rhetoric of secession and taking it all that seriously at this point in time. They really weren't. All right. And so the year begins. All right. You have now they're talking about something here when they're talking about in January of January 10th of 1860. This is not correct. Okay.
Really?
Yes. Because the election hasn't taken place yet. This is actually 1861.
That's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking. When I read that, I was a little confused about that myself, actually.
Yes, you see the next three posts, all right, and they're not talking about this. These are actually in 1861. These are not the elements that are happening in 1860. Okay, so if somebody's reading this timeline with us, all right, where they talk about the federal troops pulling out of Romney, Virginia, that's 1861.
Yeah, somebody should write them. They even have a .edu website, so they should know better.
Yeah, April 9th in 1860, Abraham Lincoln expresses his exasperation with McClellan after the generals maintained that the administration is not supporting his efforts properly. No, this is 1861. This President Lincoln isn't president yet. Okay, he's not president.
Yeah.
He doesn't take the presidency. He's not read into the presidency until 1861 in March, I believe.
No, but there was an inept president at the time when this is all starting to cascade, and you see states start to leave, and that was Buchanan, right?
Well, okay, you say that he's inept, all right. Why do you say that he's inept?
Well, if your contention is Abraham Lincoln was correct to resupply Fort Sumter, why didn't President Buchanan resupply and
mainly
all the forts in the Southern Territory?
Because, all right, you have to understand you're no longer going to be president. Okay, yes, you're still the president of the United States. All right, however, during that transition period, all right, you're a lame duck.
That's not true. That's not true. Jimmy Carter had lost the election. He was on the phone until the moment he was no longer president, trying to get the hostages freed. So I don't buy that explanation.
No, you can have. And what was the effect? The hostages weren't freed until Reagan actually assumed the office. All right, and the Iranians made sure of that. All right.
Yeah, but if your contention is secession is illegal, if you are a sitting president and a whole area of the country is threatening an illegal action,
okay,
and you already know Abraham Lincoln was elected, okay, he's just not inaugurated yet.
But you're not trying.
You need to fortify your military installations within said contested territory.
You as the president of the United States, all right, while in this kind of a situation, and you have to admit that this is an extraordinary situation that's taken place. All right, there's a lot of things going on. You do not want to hold on.
I say if you allow a section of the country to leave, and you're a sitting president, you just legitimize secession, sir. That's my contention.
I don't think that he allowed them to leave. All right, you got to remember what you're capable of doing at the time you're capable of doing things. All right, this goes back to much earlier. All right, during the Trail of Tears. Okay, for example, it wasn't that Jackson, all right, wanted necessarily to force the situation. He just understood that the situation was what it was. He also understood that if he tried to support or use federal power, all right, to protect the Indians and support their claims with physical force, that the Union would have been destroyed right then and there. All right. So the question now comes into, and you also got to remember something else is happening within the military at this point in time.
Everybody's leaving. Most of the officers are leaving to go back to their home state. They're resigning.
You're being forced to try and deal with that situation. and that situation is immediate. All right, it's an immediate concern. How that takes place and how that all is going to flesh out is going to be done. It's going to be done, all right, by another president. So in this case, Buchanan had a choice. He could have started ordering, mass call-ups and things like that. But at the same time, it's like, okay, I don't want to create a situation, all right, that the other president is then saddled with. Okay, that's really what it's coming down to. It's not his fight, all right, to make this decision. The country is going to do what the country is going to do. I'm only a placeholder head of the country until this other person is sworn in.
I don't like that that stance on the presidency. If you're the president, you're not.
I didn't say it's a stance that I personally think is a great stance, but it's an understandable one.
Okay, I actually do not know the answer to this. What state was Buchanan from?
I think he was New York.
Interesting, because New York had a lot of
I don't know. I'm going to check that out.
Copperheads. They called them copperheads. They were people that wanted the South to go freely. But anyway, while you're checking that out, let's go here. Okay, April 23rd to November 30th, 1859. Democrats meet in Charleston, South Carolina. But William Yancey leads a walkout of 8 Southern delegates over a plank in the party platform to protect slavery. So the Democrats were taking a side, MC. They were saying, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Interesting. Huh.
He was originally from Pennsylvania.
But, I mean, the Democrats were taking a side, and their side was to not fucking touch the issue at all, which you're right on. But so forcefully that they wouldn't put the plank in the party platform, and they made the Southern delegation leave. They created the split.
Well, I mean, what were you expecting them to do?
So what is a good boy?
Well, the Democratic Party platform had protected slavery all the way up to that point. They should have just stuck with that, I suppose, and maybe
there was a difference between once again, they're playing a game. All right, they didn't commit to not protecting slavery. They just removed the plank that slavery would be justified. They just said, no, we're not going to have that as part of our plank.
Okay, fair enough. May 1860, Democrats adjourn without even nominating a candidate after 57 ballots. I think popes have been chosen quicker than this. I mean, what the hell?
It shows you how contentious this has become. Okay, and it wasn't just as the one below it shows. It wasn't just the Democrats that were having problems. All right, the Republicans were having problems too. It took 3 ballots, all right, for Lincoln to be nominated.
Yeah, and I don't know the stance of Williams Seward. Seward, is that how you say it? Because there's no T there. I thought it was Stewart, but I wonder if he was elected, if that would have avoided war, or if it was any Republican at all.
It was any Republican. You got to remember the Republican plank was to move toward abolition, all right, and to prevent it, if nothing else, to prevent its expansion into the territories of the United States. That was a plank of the Republican Party, that there would be no further westward expansion of slavery within the United States.
But I'm looking at these numbers. Okay, first ballot, Abraham Lincoln only has 102 compared to 173 and a half. Where's the half? But anyway, the second ballot, holy shit. What political fucking pickpocketing happened at that convention? Because he goes from 102 to 181.
Okay. Now, what is this showing you? Okay. This is showing you what they don't show with the first ballot is what? A lot of people didn't vote. Okay. That's what it shows you. All right. You look at the numbers of people, total numbers of people voting. On the second ballot, more people voted. far more people, and the momentum was Lincoln's. And I mean, an obviously momentum shift. You end up with 11 more people voting for Seward. You end up with 79 more people voting for Lincoln. Where's the momentum going? All right. On the third ballot, Lincoln wins. All right. At that point, you probably have people that previously voted for Seward now switching sides.
Yeah, but there was some political backroom talks going on. Come on. I mean, you don't go from only 102 to 181 and then securing the nomination. Did Seward just, I don't know, like shit himself or something? Like, what the fuck did he do to piss people off?
Well, it's who knows what Seward was actually doing. Seward's kind of an interesting character in and of himself. And he does secure a cabinet position, a cabinet post within Lincoln's administration.
That's the deal. That was the fucking deal. See, I wanted to know politically where the deal happened. Right. That's where the deal happened.
But the question is if you were leading to begin with, why wouldn't you continue to try and be? For example, if you remove the name Seward, all right, and you remove the name Lincoln, and you put the name Trump, and you put the name Cruz in there, I don't see frickin' Trump sitting there going, you know what, I'll be a cabinet member.
Yeah, very good point. Exactly. I mean, you might be able to get Rand Paul to back down, maybe. He seems a little wishy-washy lately, but, not Donald Trump.
All right, but that I'm just pointing out that you're dealing with personalities, all right, and what the personalities and how they're looking at things. And in this case, what the difference that you're seeing between the Democrats and the Republicans is that overall on the platform, the Republicans are united on their platform, right? The Democrats aren't, and they don't have the personality, all right, to be able to cover up the differences.
Well, let's look over at the Democrats. Okay, they split North and South. So there was already a North and South divide within the Democratic Party, which is really interesting, which kind of causes the Civil War in a way. But the Northern Democrats, they meet in Baltimore, Maryland. They select Stephen Douglas. Any thoughts on Stephen Douglas? You want to get a little bit into him?
Well, okay. First of all, Stephen Douglas is a senator from Illinois. Okay. And what's more is by selecting Stephen Douglas already has a track record of being able to defeat Abraham Lincoln, because when he ran as a senator and became senator from Illinois, right? Stephen Douglas, okay, had defeated Abraham Lincoln. All right. So this was kind of a shrewd move, all right, in this regard. However, the problem is that Stephen Douglas himself is anti-slavery. Now, he's not as hardcore abolitionist as Lincoln is. All right. But he does support certain things and had talked publicly about supporting certain restrictions on slavery. And another thing to remember, all right, and I forgot to talk about it or mention it before, was the North's reaction, all right, to the Fugitive Slave Act, which is really intensified and has made it very difficult for someone who has any kind of stance supporting slavery to justify. And Stephen Douglas had talked about repealing, or at least doing things to prevent the implementation or the continued implementation of the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yeah, well, I mean, that, and as we discussed earlier in the week, you had the fucking Supreme Court case, that really messed shit up.
Right.
Dred Scott. I blanked on me for a second, but yeah, the Dred
Scott decision, which was much earlier, in 57, I believe, 57, 58. Obviously, this has created a roiling dynamic, right? And it's pushed it to the point of saying, look, the legislature has to act. Okay. Stephen Douglas taking this role, all right, is really kind of a problematic, because it's where legislation has to take place is within the legislature, but the legislature is fracturing around it. All right, you have areas all over the legislature. You don't have a dynamic leader in the legislature right now. All right, and this is something to remember. All right, because what the person who does eventually fill that vacuum was the very person who got caned.
Hit him again. Hit him again. No. All right. Let's talk a little bit.
And that got turned into shoot him again. Shoot him again.
Only thing wrong with John Wilkes Booth is he was 3 years too late. Anyway, moving on. I digress. Southern Democrats meet on June 28th, and I believe they chose John C. Breckinridge as a fuck you to the Northern Democrats. What do you think?
Basically, yeah. But at that point in time now, okay, so what's that going to cause? That's going to that right there seals your doom. You're not trying to unify the party against the Republicans, who you've decided are your greatest enemy. In the face of your greatest enemy, what are you doing? You're picking a fight with your own.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was just an absolutely stupid. It shows you the closed-minded attitude that many in the southern sphere, right, had gotten to.
Well, no, and I want to do this quote here. The South has come to the conclusion that in the case Lincoln should be elected, she could not submit to the consequences, and therefore, to avoid her fate, will secede from the Union. Kentucky Senator John Crittenden. I believe it's the right of a state to secede. I especially believe it's their right if they feel that the federal government has placed an undue burden upon them or their society, or is really...
Okay, first of all, if you look at what this statement says, the election of Lincoln is creating an undue burden on the South. No, I'm sorry, but that's nonsense.
You didn't let me finish. I don't believe that this was a warranted for secession so immediate. I do not believe that secession is illegal. I completely disagree with you on that, and I will argue about that until I'm blue in the face.
If you don't think, does the Constitution specify a way for a state to go through the process of a state to remove itself from the Union?
It doesn't need to.
Yes, it does.
All things not enumerated in said Constitution.
You are ignoring.
To the
I'm sorry,
to the
but it is enumerated.
It says it in there.
It is enumerated in there. It talks very specifically what the process of a state having an argument with the federal government has to take. It is enumerated in there in the judicial clauses of what it takes. And they did not follow that.
All right. Are we going to continue down the timeline, or are we going to jump into secession? I'll pull up that article.
You can pull up that article. The article's horseshit.
Well, it's by a law professor that came from a law school.
It's a law. It's a law professor that has an axe to grind that totally ignored and never even addresses that fact in the Constitution, that it specifies in the Constitution what steps a state has to take to redress. Okay. Its conclusion against other states and the federal government as a whole. There are articles in the Constitution that spell this out. All right. It doesn't use the word secession. It does use the words, though, to redress grievances or what's the other word? All right. When there's a disagreement between the states, what steps have to be taken for that to take place. The fact that the southern states never chose to engage in that regard, all right, can show you a difference between their mindsets, but it doesn't change the Constitution. It doesn't change the process as they exist within the Constitution. And that's the difference.
You might have heard these words before, but we'll just check. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them.
You can
Yeah,
quote
go on now.
you can quote the Declaration of Independence all you want, but that does not apply to secession in this case.
That is a secession document, sir. That's what they were doing.
The Declaration of Independence.
So it's good for one people, but it's not good for another.
There was no other way. I disagree with you, and because there was no other way specified from any kind of legal document that the people of the United States during the Declaration of Independence could take.
This country was born from secession, and then it was murdered.
All right, you just totally ignored that fact, didn't you? It wasn't that the people of the United States prior to the Declaration did not attempt to redress these things. The problem was that they had no ability to redress these. There was no mechanism for their representation to be heard, which is why you end up with things like no taxation without representation. This was the issue. That is that total variance, all right, to what you were dealing with during the Civil War days. And the fact that there was a method for them to attempt to legally separate from the Union that they never, ever attempted demonstrates the fact that they were only given lip service, all right, to the Union and the Constitution at the very beginning. They didn't really look at it as a governing document. And as a result, they chose to sit up there and go, okay, we're going to go to a different method. And what was the end result? You ended up with a dispute between the states where the other states said, okay, you want force of arms, we'll deal with it and settle it with force of arms. And that was the result.
A union by force is no union at all. If my wife wants a divorce, I have to give it to her. They were leaving the union.
No, you can't just walk away and say there's no legal freaking framework, in which case you sit up there and walk out as a divorce. There's a legal framework that you have to follow, that your wife has to follow. She can't just come back.
But can't I just kill her? Can't I just kill her and win? I mean, right? That was Lincoln's strategy.
No, that was the other strategy right there. I get to choose what it means to be divorced. I'll just shoot you. They started the force of arms. They did.
We'll get to Fort Sumter, sir. Don't get me started.
You're the one who came back with the idea of, okay, you want a divorce here, I'll just shoot your ass instead.
Okay, September 6, 1860. Stephen Douglas, the federal union must be preserved. Why were they saying it had to be preserved if there was no legal way for anybody to leave? These were ideas that were being argued by the scholars of the time, by the political class of the time. They were taught to Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant.
Don't come back and tell me what people were being taught or not being taught. It has absolutely no relevance, especially when you're talking about this specific case here. With Frederick Douglass's comments, all right, we're with the Union, meaning the Union, the document, the Constitution had to be preserved. That's what he was referencing. That's what he's referring to. He's not saying, he is not saying, hold on, he is not saying that the South can't sit up there and use constitutional methods to remove themselves from the Union. All right. What he is saying is that the Constitution has to be maintained. That's what he's referring to with the Union.
Okay. What? No, that was a stupid question. Can't California leave the Union is what I said, but no.
Through a constitutional process, yeah, it can.
But the same fucking assholes that said, no, you Virginia, you may not leave, gladly welcomed West Virginia into the fold, even though it was then occupied by the Confederacy for a large portion of the war. But still, they allowed secession then. No, they
didn't. They didn't allow secession then. They did not sit up there and say that say that then. That's not what was going on. And you know it's not what was going on. The difference between the people who were saying, okay, we want to sit up there and join the Union as a separate state, that is a separate discussion. on how things come into the states and how things come out of the states. And like it or not, that was voted on through Congress. And why
was there any Southern delegates? Any delegates from Virginia?
That is not the fault. All right, the fact that the Southern delegates weren't sending people to be represented at that point in time is absolutely the fault of the people of Virginia, not the freaking fault of the federal government.
The people have the right to give consent on whether or not they are governed. The people voted for secession. The people didn't want to be ran from
There was
Washington.
not one of those things that from a vote of secession that went to the people.
Yes, there was.
Really?
It went county by county. It went county by county, yeah.
No, it didn't go county by county. All right? They did not just sit up there and go back and say, we're going to establish lines on a county by county basis. That's the same freaking problem that you saw attempt to take place, all right, with Israel when they first created Israel, where you had pockets that were Israelis and pockets that were Palestinians. And look how well that turned out. You can't have a nation based along those lines. The lack of recognition of that is just astounding to me.
I'm showing my work. Just give me a second.
For you to sit up there and say that we off topic a lot following this, right? But you have, for example, we'll try slowly bring this back. You have Stephen Douglas making his comment. All right. Now, what is his comment about? His comment is about the validity of the Constitution of the United States.
What is that? That looks like a county vote to me, MC. Oh my God!
Yeah. Funny. Look at that. Look at that county vote. It looks to me as if most of the counties, if you're going by county, all right, voted not to secede.
Yeah, but you also have to look at population density and. So
now we're going back to the tyranny of the majority. You're going back to the tyranny of the majority. The very thing that you were bitching about with secession was we can't handle the tyranny of the majority, but we're gonna damn sure make sure to ram it down your throats here.
No, I just like to point out though, you were wrong. They did vote, and they voted to leave.
There was a vote of secession by county, but the votes that took place were also, and that was in Virginia. But in Virginia is kind of an exception, as you well know, all right, rather than the rule in this case as well. That the vast majority, like the secession that took place in South Carolina, that was not voted county by county. That was done by their legislatures, and it was being done through their legislatures and who was in charge.
To be fair, I will concede that point to you because I did choose Virginia on purpose. I knew the answer.
All right. But the reality is, if you take a look at that, then you can also sit up there and argue, okay, well, then look at the number of counties that were ready to secede from frickin' Virginia. And you're going to bitch about that then later?
No, I'm just pointing out that it's okay for West Virginia to leave, but goddamn, Virginia leaves.
It wasn't okay for West Virginia to leave necessarily. If it would have gone from a state and they would have had representation within the United States, they could have made their case. The fact that the Virginians were no longer in a position to even sit up there because they didn't want to be. All right. And they didn't want representation within the Constitution of the United States, where they said, we don't exist within the framework of the Constitution. We don't care what the rules of the Constitution have for us. We're going to ignore those. Yes, that puts you in a state of rebellion because you didn't even attempt to use the legal framework that is supplied and does exist within the framework of the Constitution on how these things have to be freaking adjudicated, how these things are going to be maintained. And let's be perfectly frank, all right? The main reason that people were voting for secession is that at least the Virginians understood one thing. They could either fight, all right, or allow people to go through their groups and a fight against other people that were slave owners. And that was the reason that they sit up there and chose to go against them. Because of how close they were, and what's more is a lot of them thought because of the placement of Virginia and the placement of Maryland that they could immediately surround and take over Washington.
Well, then why didn't they do it? Oh yeah, that's right, because they couldn't, and they didn't want to.
Because they were. It wasn't because they didn't want to. It's because they were prevented from doing that.
But I think it's really interesting though. If Virginia would not have seceded, two things would have happened. One, Robert E. Lee would have been leading the Union Army, and that would have been interesting to see. And two, I think the South would have won. They wouldn't have focused all their everything in Virginia. You would have had the West way more protected.
All right. First of all,
maybe
if Virginia
Vicksburg may
doesn't
not have
leave,
fallen.
hold on a second. If Virginia doesn't leave, what else happens immediately?
It's worth.
Immediately, North Carolina doesn't leave.
That's right. That was the deal. North Carolina said Virginia has to come too. I remember that. Yeah.
All right, because they were not going to sit up there and they didn't want to do it, and they didn't like the South Carolinians. All right, they thought of them as rabble rousers. So if you end up with Virginia not leaving, you also end up with North Carolina not leaving. The territory then that they have to that the South has to defend tends to be a lot smaller. That's true, but it's also not as dynamic, and a lot of the freaking weapon systems, all right, and the arsenals were in Virginia. The fact that Virginia doesn't leave would basically mean that the South would have freaking been reduced in arms dramatically. And then even further,
no, and it would have been zero Confederate Navy either, because the only ships we had came from Norfolk.
Well, it wasn't that was where the big Union ship of the CSS Virginia / Merrimack. I mean, yeah, you could say that came from there, but there were other ironclads. There were other systems that could take place, but the South then would also have been robbed of a number of material goods, all right, that was provided by the Carolinians, all right, not the least of which is the foodstuffs from the Shenandoah Valley, all right. So to say that the South would have easily won, no, they would have been hamstrung from the very beginning, all right, in how these things would have taken place, all right. Plus the fact you lose your frickin' rallying point and your number one commander in the East. Good friggin' luck.
You lose all of them. You don't have Jeb Stuart. You don't have Stonewall Jackson. You don't have Robert E. Lee.
No, you
have
Stonewall
Johnston.
You have Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was not a Virginian.
Okay. He was just working at the VMI. Okay, I got you.
All right. He was, I think, a South Carolinian, as a matter of fact. So you probably still have Stonewall Jackson. You definitely probably do not have Stuart, however. Now, so you end up with the best commander and the best cavalry commander. All right, now on the north side. All right, you could say second best commander, depending on how you want to look at it.
Do you think Lee would have taken the job if Virginia didn't leave?
Yes.
The Union job. Really? Because I think he might have, resigned. I think he might not have wanted to fight a war amongst.
Nope. His duty was to the Union and to the state of Virginia. He would have stood up there and honored his duty to the Union then at that point, because he didn't have a higher duty to Virginia.
All right. Well, scroll down a little bit on this timeline. Let's dig back into that a little bit. You could read the next one.
All right, which one do you want me to read?
Well, we did the federal union must be preserved, so let's go to November 6th.
Okay. The Republican ticket of Abraham Lincoln and Hannibal Hamlin from Maine receives sufficient electoral support for the men to become president-elect, and this is in November, and vice president-elect, respectively, of the United States. Defeated candidate Stephen Douglas expresses his belief and hope that the results of the contest will not guarantee secession.
But they did. And the people that voted for Abraham Lincoln knew damn well what would happen if he was elected. I mean, could you imagine
Once again, why would they believe that a bunch of hotheads are actually going to follow through?
Because
your comment of saying, damn well. No, I think that the people that voted for Lincoln, that voted in the presidential election, especially in the North, all right, did not believe, all right, that the South would attempt to go through with secession.
I don't know. I think you have to take the men at their word, especially when you have, because around this time, Lincoln's elected. When did Mississippi secede? When does Jefferson Davis give his speech and leave?
It doesn't matter. All right. When does South Carolina secede?
Oh, April. or no?
No, they leave.
no.
They leave almost immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, and that becomes the impetus. The first state to leave, of course, is South Carolina. And what do they start to do? They immediately try to seize federal property.
Once again, I contend that property was state property, and they sent a delegation to pay for said property.
If they were trying to pay for their own, they're trying to pay for their own property. Sorry, that doesn't wash.
Okay, fair enough. But I mean, if it's
a recognition that yes, this is federal property, and the immediate result was that what they were trying to grab wasn't a territory. What they were trying to grab were military stores. Let's be perfectly frank here. They were not looking for the fort in and of itself, especially when it's completely surrounded within the state. What they were looking for was the weapons and the guns in those systems.
Yeah, which they blew the cannon up, and they destroyed the platform to move it. So I mean, they didn't really get that much out of seizing Fort Sumter. But we're jumping ahead again, and that's what we're gonna have a problem with that going forward. By the way, guys, MC will be out of town for about a week and a half. So next weekend, Cabbage will be joining me. We're going to start a little series on the English Civil War. It will be nowhere near as contentious as this, as I'm not even British, but it should be fun. After that, the week after, MC will be back, and we'll be digging into battles, and I will have battle maps and everything hopefully worked out, and a brand new computer. So it should be fun, guys. You know, stick around for the red eye during the week, but yeah. Make sure you come back 2 weeks from now when we go with episode 6. Anyway, we can continue on. I just wanted to plug that a little bit, you know. Cabbage told me, you know, you got to tell them to like and subscribe, you know, a couple times during the show. So like and subscribe too. Hit that bell.
If you want more relevant history, all right, and some of the documentation stuff that I do, you can apply for that. My next redress of history in recent history will be a discussion about the Bay of Pigs.
Oh, that should be fun. I'll be in the chat for that one. I like how you do your monologues and stuff. You guys should go check out MC's channel. But anyway, let's continue on, sir.
All right, so lame duck President James Buchanan holds a meeting with his cabinet to determine the government's response to the crisis. The opinion is decidedly mixed, largely along geographical lines. Georgia's Howard Cobb, the Secretary of Treasury, arguing in favor of the theory of appropriateness of secession. In other words, he's like, well, you know, my state's seceded, so therefore, you know, we can ignore this. We can go ahead and let secession take place. All right. This now is everything is in flux. Okay. States are voting to secede. There are military consequences to this, but there's also a military restrictions on a lot of this. All right. The military is not prepared for this. All right.
I've never heard of Howard Cobb, but I will be looking into him now. I suddenly like this guy. But anyway.
So suddenly this guy's a good guy? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know. He was Secretary of the Treasury, which means he probably worked for the bank, which I don't like. But, you know, he had good ideas on secession. But also, I'd like to point out.
The bank, was there a Bank of the United States?
Was there's been a bank in the United States 3 or 4 times. I don't know leading up to the Civil War.
There is no bank of the United States at this time because the one who killed it, of course.
Yeah, Jackson.
was Jackson.
Yeah, I will root out you den of vipers. I will kill the bank. Anyway, no, so also all across the country, north and south, you're having newspapers printing editorials, printing articles. One article I read out of New York, which I can go grab my book and pull and read it verbatim if you would like. I don't think you need to. They literally said, let the South go, and maybe they will return to us as close friends and brothers once again in the future.
The problem with letting the South go, right, is breaking the Constitution. And that's something because they did not follow the process of the Constitution to secede. What you're basically describing now is a situation where the Constitution is null and void. Okay, for somebody to make that kind of a statement shows you the kind of ignorance of what the Constitution is and how it's applied and what its reference points are. If you ignore the fact that the Constitution is the law of the land, all right, whenever you so desire, then it doesn't have any validity anymore. Basically, at that point, you are saying let's go down the path of what you see going on currently right now in Latin America, where as long as the military is there, the military is in the force. And if you can raise a large enough military force, you're in charge.
Well, there's another quote, a quote by Lincoln, but it is questionable. But they say that
it's questionable because most likely it never took place except in the fevered mind of secessionists.
You know what quote I'm going with then. But, okay, Abraham Lincoln was asked, why won't you let the South go? He responds, let the South go? Then where will we get our revenue? I'm telling you, it was about tariffs, sir.
I'm telling you, it wasn't about tariffs. It had nothing to do with tariffs, and that quote didn't exist. That right there.
You know what? You could argue that it wasn't. It was more about slavery than about tariffs.
I can argue that quote is not.
The tariff of abominations was a real issue. There was taxation going on.
Were people
and it was on the southern ports, not the northern.
Were people fighting in Kansas because of the tariff of abomination? No.
Were people outraged? Were they in an uproar? Did that help make secession easier? Yes.
No. It was okay. In a certain regard, you could say that it's an additional justification. Notice the word, an additional justification thrown on, but it wasn't the primary one, and it wasn't the one driving.
The taxation of the South wasn't fucking surmountably more than the taxation of the northern ports.
Well,
are you going to argue that?
I'm not arguing that point. I'm not arguing that point at all. Are you
going to argue that Abraham Lincoln?
The effect was, I would argue that the taxation of different goods, because they are concentrated in one area versus another area, does lead, all right, to some problems. All right, I'm not denying that that's going to take place, but to say that the goods that the same good coming from Carolina versus the same good coming from New York, that somehow there's a difference in the tariffs. Yes, I will argue that didn't take place.
I'm telling you that the ports from the South operated all year long when the ports of a lot of the northern cities did not. I will argue that the South paid more in tariffs, therefore taxes from imports, which they relied upon, and exports, than the North did. Yes, I will argue that Abraham Lincoln was going to quadruple the goddamn tariff. Yes,
I'm sorry, I hate to tell you this. You're just looking for an excuse to hate the man. You're coming back with every freaking excuse because you know what's going to end up happening here. Okay, when we really get into Lincoln, and I'm going to slam the holy shit out of you. You guys look for excuse after excuse after excuse to find out to the point where you come back with a quote attributed to the man that everybody looks at and goes, well, this is pretty dubious quote. And you're willing to rely upon that to throw shade on the man just to justify your rage, all right, to come up with an excuse saying that he did not have a principled position. But there is a principled position that you keep ignoring. And it's a principled position of secession having to go through the constitutional process, something the South didn't want to do.
I just wrote in the chat, and I have to say it live too. My rage. I'm not the one yelling. I was a little bit. I will admit that. I was a little bit. But damn, dude. Damn. Is your arm okay? Don't press your arm.
This has nothing to do with my arm or shoveling dirt at this point in time. This has to do with your freaking intentionally ignoring that there was a constitutional process that was intentionally not followed by the South.
My problem is, though, that you and other historians want to just pound the slavery issue into the dirt. Slavery was legal in Delaware.
Did I mention slavery just now?
No, you did not. But
Okay,
what I'm arguing, the
that?
difference
The
between the
reason was
tariffs.
is because once again, you're trying to sit up there and use a justification to excuse, all right, the lack of legal behavior on the South. You want to sit up there and then throw that in the face and say, well, this is a reason why there was no principle to freaking Abraham Lincoln so that I can continue to justify my illegal and illegalities because didn't get my way. I'm going to pick up my ball and go home. And somehow there's not a legal process to sit up there and follow in these cases. Yes, there's a legal process. There's a legal process for divorce too, Mad Dodge. You can't just declare, well, I'm no longer married and walk out the freaking door. There's a legal process that has to be followed. And it's a legal process in this case where the states themselves had to agree to follow. And now you've got a group of states saying, you know what? You know that agreement that we made with you other states? Fuck you. We're not following that process anymore, and turn their back to them.
Fuck you, I'm out. Yeah. And that's
And guess what? That fuck you is no, you agreed to this. We're going to hold you accountable. And they did.
Yeah, highly accountable. Georgia howled. South Carolina got burnt to the ground too.
Freaking ignoring the fact. Okay, we'll get into that later. I've got responses to that as well.
Yeah, responses to how much of a psychopath Sherman really was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What
was Billy? What was Bill doing?
Hey, if you leave good old Billy Boy alone.
What was he doing?
He was hanging out with Jesse James. They were partying.
And he was hardly the only group that was operating in that kind of a mode, wasn't he? And you know what? And he was operating in that mode. What was that? Well, prior to the election, he was already doing this kind of stuff.
Desperate measures or call for desperate actions. But no.
Okay, and your desperate actions led exactly to this. And you're going to whine and cry about the howling, all right, that was being perpetrated by Southerners prior to the Civil War being applied to them. How dare someone apply us this?
Women, children, old men, ex-slaves, current or freed slaves, if you want to call it that. That's the people they were killing in Georgia.
Fort Pillow massacre. You guys want to sit there and talk about the
you and Fort Pillow and
Andersonville.
You're going to be in Andersonville too? Look at the prisons up there.
When did Fort Pillow take place?
Give me a fucking break.
When did Fort Pillow take place?
63 or 64, I think.
Okay. Before or after the march through Georgia?
Before, I believe. Yeah. We're gonna go through the battles. We're gonna go through all that stuff. And I don't like the idea that Andersonville was so horrible while how many Confederates were starving to death in a very well-fed Union territory. They weren't starving to death. Oh, okay.
No, there was disease that did happen, but they weren't starving to death. They didn't walk out looking like skeletons.
New York. Do we need to talk about that little nice little place? You can talk about
that if you want. Fort Pillow took place on April 12th of 1864.
I was right, 1864. See, I do know my shit when it comes to the Civil War. Anyway, scroll down a little bit.
When did the march through Georgia begin?
The march through Georgia was 65. It was pretty much
December of 64. So when you start talking about how the South was treated, when you start whining, all right, about all these things that were happening, and how dare we're going to sit up there and royally sit up there and talk about how bad Sherman was, while at the same time ignore, right, what was going on in other areas and that the South was perpetrating. Get freaking bent.
There's a class of people in the South, men, women, and children, who have to be
and there was a class of people sitting in that fort that were just massacred because they were freaking black, and you've never freaking held Bedford accountable for that action. You freaking excused his behavior. And when you talk about Lawrence, Kansas, there were old men, there were women, there were children that were left homeless as a direct result of it. So don't come back. Don't come back. And that whole thing has been confused.
The whole fucking South was homeless. You burnt the whole fucker to the ground.
Give
me a break.
I'm sorry, but it wasn't the whole South. It was a freaking 25-mile corridor between Savannah, Georgia, and Atlanta.
Is that why the South? Is that why the South lived in poverty all the way until the 1960s, until they finally got rebuilt?
I'm sorry. The South was not getting rebuilt because of what? Oh, I don't know. Maybe roving freaking gangs of freaking KKK members?
Yeah,
right?
Maybe
that
you
had to be put down.
That had to be shove fucking carpetbaggers down our throat.
There would not have been the case.
Have an influx of people that never lived there trying to rule over you.
We'll get the Reconstruction.
People.
We'll get the Reconstruction in a little bit. Because a lot of the people that you're bitching about, when you said that they never lived there, were happen to be African Americans who happen to be slaves on those plantations prior. So don't come back bitching about who all these people
They
were.
weren't the ones put in office. No, yes, sir. No, the Republican, the carpetbaggers came down, bought up the fucking empty land. They fucking started rigging the elections. They wouldn't allow the fucking Democrats.
There was no freaking election rigging, but somehow these people that were able to rig those elections couldn't continue to do it because all of a sudden you end up with what? The Jim Crow laws? Get freaking real.
No, that came later. We're talking about the immediate aftermath, and I don't know why we jump forward to that.
Because that would always lead into it when you start making excuse making.
No, it's ridiculous. That Sherman quote is real, and it is the fucking most disgusting thing.
It's not a disgusting thing. It's an understanding of what warfare is. The fact that people like you, into this day and age, can sit back and go, well, that was so horrible. It's because you don't even understand, and you don't want to understand what war actually is.
Okay. Scroll down a little bit. Let's see James Buchanan's State of the Union message, December 4th, 1860. Do you want to read it or should I? Your voice might be hurting a little bit. All right. President James Buchanan sends his State of the Union message to Congress. He finds fault with extremists on both sides of the Mason-Dixon divide. On the one hand, the long-continued and intemperate interference of the northern people with the question of slavery in the southern states has at length produced its natural effects, he laments. On the other, the election of any one of our fellow citizens to the office of president does not of itself afford just cause for dissolving the Union. President Buchanan hopes the storm will subside, but considers secession equivalent to revolution. It was a revolution. Even the president sitting at the time of transition,
it was a destruction of the entire governmental structure of the United States.
What's a revolution?
No, that's not a revolution. And that's the difference. Oh, I'm sorry. Did the governmental structure of Great Britain fall apart because of the American Revolution? Did it?
Would the government sitting in D.C. have been dissolved if they had allowed the South to leave? The answer is no.
The Constitution of the United States would have been destroyed. Yes, the government. It's not a voluntary compact. It is an agreement between the states that one group decided to abrogate.
Sounds like a tyranny to me.
No, it's not tyranny to you. It sounds like tyranny to you because all of a sudden, what? I didn't get my way? All of a sudden, anything I don't like, if I don't get my way in something, that's tyranny? That isn't tyranny.
If the union is not voluntary, then it's coerced. That is tyranny.
No, it's not. The compact is voluntary, but the agreements can't be abridged. You can't sit up there and say, well, it's voluntary until I say I don't like this anymore. This is an agreement between people until I don't like the agreement, so therefore I'm going to ignore the agreement. That's not the that is what the Constitution was trying to protect. It is not something so freaking flimsy as just a gentleman's agreement between a couple of people.
To quote Star Wars on this one. So this is how the Republic dies, with thunderous applause.
There was thunderous applause taking place here? Guess what? No.
There was in the South. There's celebration for a while, but
and so they got the tyranny that they so richly wanted to happen to them.
All right. So next, December 8th, 1860, Secretary of the Treasury and Georgian Howell Cobb resigns from his post. The evil has now passed beyond control. He warns President Buchanan.
Yeah. So he
must be met.
And
Wait
so
a second.
and so
Let
what
me
he
finish
did
his
is
quote. Let me finish his quote. And must be met by each and all of us under our responsibility to God and our country. He was talking about his country.
He was talking about his God, which was Satan.
Oh, come on now. Who's throwing ad homs? Come on.
He wants to play. He wants to sit up there and assume, and this is the whole thing. Well, I'm righteous because my state has done this. No, you're not righteous. I go back once again. What was there a structure, an agreed upon structure for states to no longer be part of the union within the framework of the Constitution? And the answer is yes. You can't get away from that. And was that methodology even attempted to be applied by the southern states? No, especially South Carolina. The answer to that again is no. And for you to sit up there and for the United States, when you talk about the revolution in the United States, this is not the same thing. Our country's structure, all right, is dependent upon the Constitution of the United States. And that was being abrogated here. Now, if you're going to say that somehow that this wasn't a threat to the entire very governmental structure of the United States, it's because you like the fact that there was a secession. You don't want to look at what the ramifications and why it had to be applied the way it did.
That's what we're doing in this. Is
why there was a fight for the union. All right, but you guys just want to continue to reject the very fact, all right, that this was not just a gentleman's agreement.
Okay. No, we've covered that point before. I'm glad to let you revisit it, but I want to go on to here. It's not the whole speech, which I might actually post on my channel. But December 14th, 1860, the Georgia legislature calls on the Deep South states to send delegates for a meeting to form a separate confederation. Senator Jefferson Davis of Mississippi observes solemnly. The argument is exhausted. All hope of relief in the Union through the agency of committees, constitutional legislation, or constitutional amendments is extinguished. There can be but one conclusion as he sees it. We are satisfied the honor, safety, and independence of the Southern people require the organization of a Southern Confederacy.
And so Jefferson Davis, this man of integrity that you talk about, comes out here and lies. Who flat out lies right there in his little speech.
Go ahead and clarify how you're...
It's extinguished. And exhausted. Sorry, he didn't. They didn't exhaust it. They rejected it. They themselves rejected it.
3 days later,
lying to the people of his state, saying, oh no, we tried everything and all the remedies that are available to us. We really tried. No, he didn't. And he knows it. He knows that that's a lie.
I'm the greatest teacher ever.
3 days later, a secession convention opens in Columbia, South Carolina.
Okay, a group of frickin' treasonous SOBs sit up there and agree to meet in South Carolina. Congratulations.
Man, you sound like King George. I swear.
That's not like King George. This has nothing to do with King George, and stop trying to conflate the two. It's the only thing that you guys can hold on. Look, it was just like a revolution. No, it was an abrogation by the South of their responsibilities under the Constitution that they agreed to. And you keep wanting to ignore that and keep going, oh, no, it was a revolution. It was a revolution. Because it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient to ignore the fact that the legality of this, all right, exists. And the responsibility for this exists on the side of the South. They're the ones.
I'll tell you right now, if secession is treason, they should have hung Jefferson Davis. What they do? They freed his ass.
Why did they free? Why did they free? Why was he freed?
That article that I have linked you to said that he was freed because they didn't want to argue the constitutionality of secession in itself.
The legality of freeing him. How was he legally freed?
No, they bailed him out and then they dropped the
Stop right
fucking
there.
charges. He
Was
got a
it
full
an
presidential
as-
pardon, right?
No. What was it? Was it an executive order?
I believe it was a pardon.
Okay. Why was he pardoned? Guess what?
Because they didn't want to sit him in court.
No. See, they. No, a president of the United States issues a pardon. Does he have that authority?
Well, Jefferson Davis didn't recognize his authority.
I didn't ask if Jefferson Davis recognized that authority or
Jefferson
anything
Davis
else. Does the president of the United States? Does the president of the United States have the authority of pardon? So there is no legality there. This is the problem with this. Well, I think the reason they did it was this, and I think that because I want to read into, all right, the minds of the people.
That's our job is to read between the lines of history and figure out their motivations.
Tell me, did they bring up the fact that maybe somebody was looking at this saying, you know what, this will help heal the divisions between the nation? Maybe I should pardon him on those grounds. No, see, there it is. Bullshit. No, you don't even countenance that, do you? No, you look for the simplest excuse to continue your rage and hatred.
My rage and hatred. You're the one yelling. You're the one saying.
Because I'm tired of listening to this crap. When I bring up something that's very accurate and very apropos, what did you do with it? Oh, bullshit. I'm just going to ignore it.
You're ignoring my points.
I'm not ignoring your point. I did address your point.
They were going to try him in Virginia.
Okay.
They were afraid that the court would find in his favor. No. The government of the motherfucking United States, dumbass.
No, it wasn't the government of the United States. It wasn't the government of the United States. Sit up there. Look, you keep going saying you're making an accusation, and I'm telling you, show me the damn evidence that proves that over to a shadow of a doubt, while at the same time ignoring the evidence, all right, that's like, you know what? The war is over. Let's heal the wounds. You threw that and said that statement doesn't exist. All right, but your statement
they didn't want to heal the wounds when they split the South into military districts. They didn't want to heal any wounds.
Bullshit.
So I reject.
They were trying to heal the
your
wounds.
argument, sir.
The problem, of course, you reject it because you don't want to
disenfranchise a whole segment of the country.
You don't want that.
They don't want to heal the wounds. No, if you want to heal the wounds, you don't disenfranchise everybody.
I'm sorry,
oh my
but
God,
you have to disenfranchise. When you say disenfranchise,
administration, why was the South disenfranchised? They are the goddamn Republican Party. That's who they is.
Let's talk about this later. Right, because when we get into this, we'll have this discussion, and it'll be just as vociferous as it is now. Because the one thing that you were refusing to even acknowledge, all right, was that what the South was doing to cause this shit. What was going on in these areas?
And
it wasn't just one
what
side.
the North did. You
I'm not refusing to acknowledge what the North did. I have never. You show me one time I refused to acknowledge what the North did.
The tariff controversy.
I have not disacknowledged it. I said it isn't as big an issue as you keep trying to claim that it was, and that it's more justification to the secession movement than it was reality. Because the states, if you take a look at what was going on, especially in the papers at that time, they weren't referencing, all right, except for in small little areas once in a blue moon, all right, the tariffs. Their biggest issue was slavery, and you know it.
I agree that slavery was an issue, and I have conceded that fact to you. The main issue, I refuse to acknowledge that. I think it was a combination of issues.
The main issue was freaking taxation. All right, if that was the main issue, then that should be the primary thing pointed. It should be the prominent.
There is a combination of issues. Yes. Wait a minute.
You started this. You said that the primary issue was taxation.
There is taxation. There is slavery. There is the fact that the balance was thrown into contestant. There is no more Mason-Dixon line. There's no more free and slave. We already covered that with
right. So we're back to slavery. Slave.
There is
tariff here.
4 or 5
slave, and then a tariff here.
There's a cultural divide. We have pointed to
there is a cultural divide. You're right about that.
There are quite a few different reasons for the war, but then it all goes back to slavery. That's funny.
It does go back.
We're brought up
because one thing
combination of issues.
What you don't want to recognize,
that's legal.
Let's talk about
slavery was legal. It was legal. You don't have a revolution or something.
If you don't have slavery, You don't have the bifurcation of the societies. All right. You don't have the arguments. They go away. This is something that you don't ever want to look at. If you sit up there and remove slavery from the question, all right.
Why did it take 600,000 people to die for slavery to be removed when the British did it far easier?
Because the British governmental structure isn't the structure of the United States of America.
You're telling me that they could not have paid for the slaves' freedom. You're telling me they couldn't have done that.
No.
And that would have been a more moral
whether
outcome.
whether it would have been a more moral outcome or not. There's a difference in the governmental structure between the United States, all right, and other countries. There's reasons why the United States can do things other countries can't, but there's also reasons why the United States can't do things that other nations can. And a good portion of that is due to the Constitution of the United States. Our governmental structure, the founding of our country, is not like any of the rest of them. They're not constitutional republics. None of them were. None of them came into being because people got together and said, you know what? Okay. We're going to create a governmental structure that's completely different than anything else that has been on planet Earth.
Just a second. All right. I was reading here. Okay. We'll go back to South Carolina adopting the ordinance of secession in a second. I want to jump forward because this is very valuable to our current argument. December 22nd, 1860. President-elect Abraham Lincoln tells Congressman Alexander Stephens of Georgia that his incoming government will not interfere with slavery. The South would be in no more danger in this respect than it was in the days of George Washington. But he is doubtful this assurance will be accepted. You think slavery is right and ought to be extended, while we think it is wrong and ought to be restricted. That, I suppose, is the rub. Now, I would like to add to that. Abraham Lincoln proposed a constitutional amendment for the continuation of slavery forever. Forever. He wanted that amendment put in. He was trying to placate the South when it came to slavery. So your argument, and you're yelling at me, calling me an idiot and saying that I'm not recognizing the fact that slavery was the cause, is moot. Because Abraham Lincoln would have protected the fucking institution of slavery. So there has to be, from looking at it in a historical context, which I'm now studying for my bachelor's in history.
A president of the United States is just a president of the United States. All right, I'm going to cut you off because what you're doing is you're just throwing shit that doesn't stick. The constitutional structure of the United States, whether President Lincoln says, well, we're going to do this or not, he said, notice what he said here. He said the South would be in no more danger. In other words, the states that already existed. Okay, the slavery, he wasn't going to interfere with slavery inside of their states is what he's saying. All right, but that wasn't it. They wanted to continue it on. And he said, we're not going to allow it to, we're going to start putting restrictions on it. That's the rub. And what's more is he puts a further recognition on there, which is, I doubt you're going to listen to this.
Wasn't that influenced by the technology evolving during that time as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a part of it. We did cover that earlier, actually.
We got in depth on that a little bit ago. Pinoid, how are you doing, dude?
I came in late. Sorry.
No, both of you guys, welcome. We are discussing the Civil War, and it's a little heated. I'm glad you guys jumped in. That way, now I can step away for a second and stretch my legs, go use the restroom, and
you can hide. That's what he wants.
I'm not going to hide. I'm going right back. I'll fight with you all day long.
Yeah, I heard you in here getting your ass handed to you. I figured I'd come in and try and take a couple licks real quick for you.
Right. All right. Well, now I'm tagging you in. It's your turn.
I mean, the bitches is like I have a hard time defending your perspective. I really do. Like, because if you think about the British model, like what would have happened if a noble would have said, I'm not gonna end slavery on my land? When the fucking government would have just came and took its fucking land. And then took his fucking people. It wouldn't have worked in Britain. You can't get rid of fucking, like, in Britain it works because it's a top-down basic monarchy. It's not a fucking constitutional republic. You know, they don't have the right to vote for their people. And the only reason why it was so bad in the United States is because the people had the right to vote and the right to fucking be secure in their property. And, well, you know, considering the fact that they thought people were property, that was probably the main issue with that. And I heard you in there getting in his ass, fucking MC, about how you don't understand how war is. And I wanted to put a term to y'all. It's called Bella Romanus. And it means war the way the Romans did it. and that tends to just be how you explain fucking war.
Well, the war of that time, basically. That's where that phrase comes from. You have to look at the time that you're at during that war. Like, during like World War II, it was common to say like something like zipper heads or something like that. Whereas now it's entirely
still do it today.
racist.
They still do it today. They call them fucking sand monkeys and shit.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, right? But that's a normal thing. But when you talk about like Bella Romanus, or if you say like Vi Victus, something along these type of lines, which means woe to the vanquished. The Romans, when they went to war fully. They destroyed shit. They did not fuck around. There was no playing games. They didn't leave people there to fight them later. They finished it that fucking moment, and that's what you do when you're in fucking total war.
They would even salt the area that.
Well, they did it to Carthage.
Uh-huh.
They did that to Carthage because they feared Carthage too much. But
they did it to fucking Celts too.
Yeah. You're bringing up total war. Did Robert E. Lee rape and pillage and burn as he moved through Pennsylvania? The answer is no. What about Maryland?
Did one of his generals?
I don't believe so. You
and
can
when he was marching through
Pennsylvania, I don't believe they.
And when he was marching through Pennsylvania, all right, what was Jefferson or Stewart, Jeb Stuart doing?
He was attacking military outposts for.
And what
shoes.
else was he? What else was he doing?
Shoes, dude.
What else was he doing? They were grabbing anything and everything that looked upon.
They had no food. They had no shoes. You guys burnt everything.
So don't freaking come whining and crying when that same action gets applied to you.
No, they didn't burn a hole through Pennsylvania.
That's good warfare. All right. That's a good thing to do when you go to war. You don't just fuck up the enemy and their army. You fuck up their fucking houses. You fuck up their warehouses, their manufacturing, their ability to transport shit, their bridges, their roads. That's how you conduct war.
Well, I mean, Russia is just like, fuck it. They're going to do it anyway. Let's just wreck our own shit.
There you go.
Well, and then go into the mountains.
Well, no, and a lot of people that left the Union, a lot of the railroad men, before they left, they ripped up the fucking railroad tracks in Maryland and then crossed back into Virginia. So there was some of that, disrupting No, but wait a minute.
But we're gonna take our Twain with us.
No, wait a minute, though. There is a big difference between ripping up a railroad line or stealing shoes from a military depot and burning Savannah, Georgia to the ground.
They did not burn Savannah, Georgia to the ground. Atlanta got burned. All right.
Okay, Atlanta
got burned. Atlanta was burned to the ground, not because they were trying to burn it to the ground. Atlanta got burned to the ground because the military stores that they did start burning, all right, caught fire in other areas, and the looters were running around, and these are southern looters, all right, were running around burning houses that they went through so they couldn't be caught.
Yeah,
I'll have to fact check you on that when we talk about the Battle of Atlanta.
I will say, as a libertarian, all right, and as a person who has a major problem with fucking authority to begin with, I don't like the ideology of forcing one generation to live by the rules of the next. I think that's not positive.
So the hereditary, like, culture type of aspect?
Well, just in general, and the fact that, like, who put it this way? Forcing one generation or forcing taxes upon the next generation to pay for the one before it is not a positive thing. It's not something that we should be doing. That was something that was fought against in the founding of our country. Just to begin with.
Theoretically, you don't have to, though, because you have a legislature that can decide, okay, we're no longer going to make those kind of payments of that generation.
Yeah, but you have to. Yeah, but you have to.
Well,
you got to pay.
Now, because of that, America is known as the country that doesn't pick up their bill. towards a lot, towards all the other countries.
You know, I have a problem with that. I do have an issue with that. And I mean, I will say, like, yeah, the thought of the fact that you should be able to secede from the fucking union if you feel as though that's what would be positive for your people at that point, it's not a bad idea. It's really not. If it got down to the point where they said, hey, look, you know, we want to start teaching your kids about gay sex in school, and we're going to take your kids from you if you're not going to let them turn trans, like they're trying to do now, we should have every right to go, yo, fuck you, we're no longer part of this country.
There is a process, a legal process to do that, though.
Okay, you know what? You keep bringing that up, MC. I have the Constitution in my hand. What article and section?
Take a look at the article that sits when it talks about disagreements between states. Because that's essentially what you're looking at on how this stuff will be redressed. You also have the ability of doing a constitutional amendment. You also have the ability to call a constitutional convention or a convention of states. You have these other remedies. They do exist. Not one of them was applied.
Yeah. I'd honestly like to know, because I've never actually heard of fucking there being a legal way to secede from the fucking union. Because I thought we solved that with the Civil War, and we said that's not allowed. That's not a legal thing to do.
You can redress. You've got to go through the Constitution, and basically what would happen is you'd have to have the rest of the states agree that you are no longer part of the United States after you ask to be removed.
And what if they say no?
Well, then you're still in the United States.
Then no, there isn't a fucking way for you as a single state.
There is a way to do it, because you got to understand what the Constitution is. The Constitution is an agreement between states on how these issues are resolved.
Right, but yeah, but if you don't have the right to
you're right. When you join the United States, you are turning over that portion of your sovereignty to the federal government. That is very true.
The only thing I can even see here is Article 4, Section 4, Republican government. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion. And on the application of the legislature or of the executive. Wait a minute, though.
It's in the judiciary.
Wait. No, I like this. Okay, they shall protect them against invasion, and on application of the legislator or of the executive against domestic violence. The executive, if you reject the claim that secession is legal, the executive branch levied war against its own people. It didn't protect them against domestic violence. It initiated the domestic violence.
No, it did not initiate domestic violence. In fact, the initiation.
Well, let's not split through the first punch.
Well,
all right. Let's agree that they were punches thrown. All right. But they did fucking retaliate with violence or bring upon with violence. You know what I mean? Even though, like, I'm pretty sure the South never actually attacked the North first.
Well, 95. Also, if we're going to deal with this, we're going to have to say about how Texas decided to try and we're going to be our own republic.
That's not true. Because during the founding of the Texas, the first thing they tried to do was join the United States, and the United States rejected them.
Didn't we cover that episode 1? I thought we did Texas episode 1. But no, Vash, bring it up. Go ahead. Like, I don't care.
I mean,
we've done our argument already, so
it's this concept of like, if you finally get that freedom, like I think the opera, or I hate fucking referring to it, but Hamilton. Whenever they finally succeeded from the British, and the British goes, all right, you're on your own now. It's a big world, big world. And, you're going to have to protect yourself and all that shit. Good luck. You have to talk to Spain. You have to talk to France. You have to talk to England. You have to talk to Japan. Good luck not pissing everybody off. Meanwhile, we're also going to use pirate ships to keep raiding you, and we're going to just say, oh, well, they were pirates.
Well, no, and real quick, before we sidetrack too much, I think this December 26th, we're almost wrapping up 1860. The United States flag comes down over historic Fort Moultrie in Charleston, South Carolina. At the garrison, I'm going to mute you, Pinoid, real quick, because I think you're in your car. Okay. The U.S. flag comes down over historic Fort Moultrie in Charleston, South Carolina, as the garrison departs for an unfinished fortification in the middle of the harbor called Sumter. Why did they have to relocate him, see? If that's a federal territory, that's federal land, why should they move? They should have just stayed there, right?
Because militarily, it's an untenable position, so they're going to one that's easier to sit up there and maintain.
The unfinished fort in the middle of the harbor is easier to maintain?
Yeah, it's harder to get to. It's more secure and it's more easy to supply.
Oh, fair enough, you know, because the Confederacy did have a shit navy. That's true.
You know, there are reasons people do when you talk about fortifications from a military standpoint. All right, there's advantages. All right, when you've got a river between you and your enemy, it's hard to sit up there and land troops. It's hard to get across large bodies of water. Even you know, I mean, if it's just a stream that you can walk across, yeah, that's fine. All right, but if there's a river, all right, where people even if it's up to your waist. Walking through a river up to your waist is not an easy thing necessarily to do. Right? Can you do it? Yeah, but you can't do it rapidly. It inhibits movement. So from a military standpoint, you would rather be on the other side of the river.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. And this timeline leaves out a couple of instances. I think in New Orleans around the same time, a man climbs up to the top of a tower and he removes the United States flag. He then gets shot, right?
No. That's after.
That's an American, or that's after.
Yeah. That's okay. Butler. Remember Butler?
Oh, that's right. Okay, so I'm a few years off there. But wasn't there a American that was killed trying to put a flag back up in South Carolina around this time? Possibly. I thought there was one from each side.
There were several things that were starting to take place. One of the things that started. I thought
it was Lincoln's godson, and he knew the man that was killed, and it really pissed him off. Well, I remember this.
A lot of people knew each other when they start talking about these, you know, the upper echelons. A lot of the upper echelons knew one another. Now, one of the things that has been happening at this point is in Texas. All right, several of the commanders are being surrounded by Confederates. They're turning over their garrisons. One of which, the wife, if you have to read it, the wife is just apoplectic that he dares turn over his command to the Confederacy. That happens. She never forgives him. Basically, I mean, it was her commentary is absolutely horrible.
Really? That's fucked. Like the poor dude had to get a divorce too. Like that's fucked.
I mean, it's so there are a number of things that are happening. You also now have in the what we call the Indian country or the Indian nations. All right, a series of conflicts beginning to erupt, where several of the tribe members are now taking advantage of the situation to attack other tribe members, all right, that they've disagreed with, and some of those disagreements go all the way back to the Trail of Tears. So you basically have a Civil War family style kind of Hatfield McCoy style taking place within the Confederacy, within the Indian nations. Which then joins the South as part of the Confederacy.
Yeah, I know. And if Pinoid is still in the chat, I typed in there too, but I'll just say it also. I just muted you because I was trying to read that little blurb on the timeline.
There was just background stuff. It wasn't like a personal like mute type of thing. It was just so that way he could say stuff. It wasn't.
It should be pretty obvious if he's not willing to mute me, he was muting you for a different reason.
Yeah, really. There was a couple times where I was like, should I just mute him? He's being a real prick. But no.
I warned you I was in a bad mood.
I know. It's all good. Okay, so South Carolina takes possession of Fort Moultrie and Castle. I can't see the rest of that. But yeah, okay. So South Carolina starts to seize the forts, okay? This is before President Abraham Lincoln is actually inaugurated. this is where I think Buchanan really fucked up. Okay, you either allow them to secede and make it okay before you leave office, or you strengthen Abraham Lincoln's hand by fortifying and resupplying immediately.
Well, but did they have? You got to remember, all right. Buchanan's. You got to understand. Right now, the entire military, the entire federal military, is in chaos. There's people resigning. You don't know who to trust. You don't know where the orders are going. There's orders being given out that are contradicted, by the next person in charge. I mean, there's a lot of chaos going on within the military. You don't have solidified command anymore. All right, it is basically broken down. Right. You have what you think the authority chains of command are, but if the person in there is a pro-Confederacy person, he may be freaking rerouting orders or ignoring the orders or doing anything. And a lot of this stuff is happening, inside of Washington. This is happening in Washington, D.C. itself, let alone in the outer areas.
See, this is why I like that I'm going for my degree in history, because I'm going to learn a little bit more in depth about this, because I never heard that. The way I usually read about it in here is they immediately tender their resignation and they leave home state and then get drafted in,
Well, some of them did.
Join the Confederate Army.
The majority did that, yeah. I mean, but you got to remember, one thing that should be obvious is from reading our history of these time frames, right? It's just how much a single person's personality, how much effect it actually has in the conduct of the war. It isn't as industrialized as you see from like World War II on. Right. Yeah. People forget that the people's personalities played a massive different role back then. All right. It was far more part of the problems and how these things, how battles took place and what happened during the battles. All right. Both good and bad. All right. Was very reliant upon the personality and the circumstances, the personal circumstances of the commanders on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And to finish what I was reading about South Carolina taking Fort Moultrie, they also took Castle Pinckney, and Georgia agrees to send troops to their aid if attacked. That right there is major, in my opinion. What say you guys?
Well, it shows you that it's going to be a conflict, that there's going to be a military conflict.
Well, the reason I say it's major is because if South Carolina leaves and Georgia has no intention of following suit, then they wouldn't be going onto a war footing. They wouldn't be pledging to send defense. There is no Confederacy at this point, guys.
There's no official Confederacy. That is correct.
Yeah.
But the South will rise again.
Well, no. See, even with no Confederacy, you have Georgia pledging its aid to South Carolina. I really believe that's a major development in how this house of cards started to fall in the South.
Okay, but if we're going to say that, then we're also going to have to say about how each state was going to try and have its own currency.
Oh yeah,
that was an issue they had.
Well, and I have some Confederate currency that I'll scan onto my computer, and we'll show. We'll do an episode about currency, also because I want to talk about Abraham Lincoln inflating the dollar, and then the South, how they only printed, on their money, they only printed one side because they didn't have the money to put ink on the back side. Yep. It was crazy. But December 31st, the Senate Committee of 13 reports its failure to reach any agreement. Louisiana Senator Judah Benjamin observes ominously, "The day for adjustment has passed." Pleading for accepting the course of the inevitable, he calls upon his northern colleagues, "Let this parting be in peace." That was, the senator from my home state of Louisiana. And even then, they were begging for peace. And see, how can you say we were the aggressors when even my own senator, I wasn't born yet, but whatever, from my home state was begging for peace.
You were begging for peace. You were begging for the destruction of the Union. You were begging for the freaking. Just go ahead and let the Constitution just be destroyed. Don't worry about it. That's what they're begging for. Don't come back and hold us accountable for our agreements. Don't hold us accountable to the Constitution of the United States. No, we're just going to do whatever the hell we want, even though it totally destroys your entire governmental structure.
I don't believe it destroyed the structure in the North. I do get when we
it
started
has
yelling. I don't want to start yelling again.
It has to do that. If you take a look at how the Constitution is created, you can no longer have a Constitution of the United States if states are allowed just on their own, all right, to decide to secede without the rest of these states agreeing to it. It means that the agreements between states are null and void. If that's the case, then the entire Constitution is null and void.
You know what's funny? I didn't even know that this timeline came from a college in Georgia. So I just saw the contact information at the bottom, and that's interesting. But it doesn't seem biased, though. That's nice.
It doesn't seem biased. It's not as biased. I will say that this part of the timeline is not as biased. It is not as accurate as it should be, though. Once again, some of that stuff that's listed for the 1860s actually took place in the 1861.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we go forward with this series, we're going to break away from the timeline format, like I said, and we're going to look at individual battles. Probably do an episode on a battle and then do an episode on the politics at the same time and try and keep in sync.
Yeah, that's
going to be really hard.
Yeah, that's going to be difficult because, first of all, there's several battles going on very similarly in time frame wise, and you're probably going to see some disjointedness because what's going on in the West versus what's going on in the East, etc.
Yeah, it's going to be a little difficult going forward, but we'll figure it out, guys. Any other thoughts do you have, or should we go off air and just have a nice discussion offline?
Is there something you want to bring up at this time frame?
Yeah. Vesh, you showed up late. Were you in the chat for a little bit? Did you hear us discussing any points you want to bring up or anything?
A little bit, and like you said previously, this timeline does leave out a few. Although it is it's a very good timeline. It still seems to leave out some areas that I feel that are impactful.
Well, what would you like to have included in the timeline?
Let me see here. Okay, these were in the 1800s.
Yes, this was up to we basically did it from about 1830 to 1860.
Okay, so from 1830 to 1860.
I mean, some of the stuff we may have covered earlier, but I have no problem going back and revisiting some of the stuff.
Well, I mean, you kind of have to in
yeah, you do.
In history, you always have to go back because you'll never. One thing that my history teacher taught me was that you'll never ever be able to cover it all. Like you just can't.
Well, no, because there's too many pieces for it. So I'll be right back. I'm gonna get some water. So while you're doing that, MADD, do you want to take over?
Yeah, absolutely. So going through the timeline, me and MC have a lot of points of contention, but I would really like to know where exactly in the Constitution he's saying you have a legal area to secede, because what I take it as is the 10th Amendment. Any freedoms not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and or to the people respectively, and I would include secession within the 10th Amendment, which is explicitly about the states' rights. So there's that.
Well, I mean, it doesn't directly mention secession, but the Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution to basically be a indestructible quote unquote union, meaning that there is no legal basis a state can point to for seceding, which means that basically that people held the Confederate secession blatantly illegal.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so the Articles of Confederation did cite a perpetual union, which means a continuous union forever. But then they scrapped that and they created the Constitution. So that being said, Didn't they violate their own law when they went from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution? Therefore, secession is legal. Yes, because they had signed a perpetual union within the Articles of Confederation.
They did not. They did not. They did not. And here for a variety of reasons. What they did is they basically scrapped the entire Confederation. And why did they scrap the entire Confederation? They scrapped the entire Confederation because it wasn't workable in practice.
The South didn't think the Constitution was workable anymore within the Union. So,
and guess what? They were wrong. But unlike the Articles of Confederation, all right, there were methodologies, all right, within the Constitution, within the framework, all right, to redress every one of these issues on how it had to take place. To include, like I was saying, look at the judicial, when it talks about the judicial branch, when it talks about disagreements between the states. That's essentially what you're dealing with when you talk about secession and how it's addressed. And once again, you still have, at no point in time, do you have the states without the ability to call a convention of states. At no time do you have something where you can't put in an amendment, all right, to remove yourself and ask for a congressional amendment process to say, you know what, I no longer, the state of Georgia will no longer be part of the United States. You could have amended the Constitution like that. There are amendments that could have been attempted and never were. You can change the Constitution of the United States.
Article 3, Section 2. Trial by jury. Original jurisdiction, jury trials. The judicial power shall extend to all cases of law and equity arising under the Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made, of which shall be made under their authority to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and councils, to all cases of admirals and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between the citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens of subjects. But yeah, that's very convoluted. It doesn't mention secession, and matter of fact, that whole section is in parentheses, which says modified by the 11th Amendment. So what's the 11th Amendment? Okay. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity, commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state, or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. This doesn't tell you how you can leave the union.
It just told you right then and there, right, that the Supreme Court of the United States, the judicial branch, is where you go to for disputes between states. It says that directly.
Yeah, but it wasn't a dispute between
Louisiana.
It wasn't a dispute between Louisiana and Massachusetts. It was a dispute between a collection that became the Confederacy and the federal government.
It also says
Washington.
Dispute between the state. It also says between the United States and a state.
All right. What about? All right. There are some thoughts of constitutional the constitutional basis of secession being resolved by the Civil War, and I would like to bring up the just to kind of fuel this argument a little bit. I'd like to bring up Texas versus White in 1869.
Okay, why don't you read that? Because I'm not familiar with that at all.
All right,
or at least a quick synopsis. Yeah.
Texas v. White. It's saying it's mentioning Supreme Court Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase. That is a terrible name. I feel bad. Wrote that the union between Texas and the other states was as complete as perpetual, and as indissoluble as the union between the original states. Sorry, I can't read very well.
No, that's okay, because I've had problems all day today pronouncing.
That's why I was laughing. Yeah, MC couldn't talk earlier either. That's the only reason I had a little giggle there. So my apologies.
Well, I mean, at least I'm not stuttering. There was no place for reconsideration or revocation, except through revolution or through consent of the states. The majority opinion struck down the Texas Ordinance of Secession, calling it null, crafted a decision that rendered all acts of secession illegal according to the perpetual union of both the Articles of Confederation and subsequent Constitution for the United States. Chase did leave an opening, revolution or the consent of the states, but without either, secession could never be considered a legal act.
Interesting that they brought up the Articles of Confederation, considering it's null and void. How are they using that in their case decision?
I didn't write
That's
this.
interesting.
So I didn't write this. That was a reference from a freaking judge. And some judges do a lot of stupid things now and then. In case you haven't noticed, like using international law, aka Ginsburg.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, MC.
But I think this case could have been mentioned pretty well on this. And
well, we were trying to stay in the timeline. You're right. That would have been a good case to have mentioned, but it was one I was not familiar with, actually.
Yeah, it's Texas versus White, 1869.
See, now I'm going to have to do something. He's giving me research. What kind of crap is this?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. Is like, you know, I like timelines, but I believe that whenever you just look at a timeline, then they kind of try and sweep other stuff under the rug for for the sake of expedience. But it's like you can't do that. You can't.
You'll find Mad Dog.
What about that case?
Well, in this case, when we're talking about the Civil War, in this case, though, the one thing that is very true. Obviously, this case comes after the fact, right? And this is a decision after the fact. It's the same thing with the decision on the Korematsu decision, right? Where they declared it an absolute abomination, right? Well, that's all well and good, but that's after the fact, right? If you don't know what the Korematsu decision is, the Korematsu decision was the decision by the then Supreme Court to validate the internment of Japanese Americans that Roosevelt had ordered. Okay, later on it gets overturned, saying no, that decision was the wrong decision by the Supreme Court. But once again, these are two Supreme Court decisions that one overrules another Supreme Court, which is somewhat unusual in some cases, but also does happen from time to time. All right, but it's important to understand what the ruling authority is also at that time. All right, and in this case, the Civil War begins in 1861 for all intents and purposes, and is over by 1865. Yes, 1869 isn't that far removed, but it is after the fact. It is after the Civil War is basically over.
And it's also after Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed, which might have made a little bit more animosity towards the secessionists.
Well, it did. I mean, I don't want to get too far into this because we were yelling about it earlier, but it does definitely cause a lot of the hardliners. It gives them, when it came to Reconstruction, a reason for frickin', bearing down very harshly on the South.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell by your voice that you're getting a little hoarse and you have a long fucking week and a half ahead of you. Any final thoughts before we revisit the Civil War series in 2 weeks?
No, thank you, Bash. I appreciate you coming in, man. Helps out. I tried to get people in here earlier.
Yeah, I mean, like, I just woke up and I was like, shit! Because I had like a back-to-back stream yesterday.
Well, actually, and Vash, I would like to extend a invitation for tomorrow's Red Eye. You know, you're always welcome, but MC is going to be gone, so I have a permanent panelist gone for a week and a half. So I could use some help if you want to come join us.
Yeah, I would love to help, man.
All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for watching us argue about the Civil War. We will be back with it in 2 weeks, and we will be. What do you think, Fort Sumter? Is that what we're gonna start it out at, MC, or to be determined?
First, we kill them, and then we tell them where they came from.
Yeah, Fort Sumter would probably be good to start with.
All right, awesome. And I want to remind everybody, next weekend, Cabbage will be here with me. We're going to go into to the English Civil War a little bit. I was debating with myself that or the War of the Roses. We'll go with the English Civil War because I'm doing the American as well. You know, so we'll go with that. But that should be fun. Come join us tomorrow for the Red Eye stream. I do have a Patreon. It's on my channel page. Check it out. I also have Streamlabs with some merch on it. Like, subscribe, and enjoy your day. We're out of here.